Can't stop, won't stop. Another video explaining the complex link between Bitcoin and ecology, as it's a fascinating subject that deserves exploring further. We discussed the topic with Sebastian Guspierre to explore a number of points to definitively put an end to the anti-Bitcoin cliches, an example being the preamble to the MiCA Act, which included all sorts of shortcuts, extrapolations, and errors about how Bitcoin works. The principal cliché being that Satoshi Nakamoto's invention would be extremely harmful to the environment. Currently, we see this narrative has become completely embedded in some people's understanding of Bitcoin. We at GAC will continue to provide as much material as possible to raise awareness of this issue and to stop Bitcoin being unfairly demonized based on misinformation. Satoshi Nakamoto's invention must be seen for what it is, an incredible opportunity to facilitate the energy transition and reduce the pollution of certain industrial activities. This is a topic close to our hearts, and that's why we are working hard with BBGS to bring you another project related to eco-friendly mining. Mining Bitcoin is participating in a technological, monetary, ecological, and social revolution while being profitable. What more could you ask for? Bitcoin's mining activities could help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but the media rarely talks about that, as Bitcoin makes it possible to align ecological objectives with energy producers' economic interests. In other words, until now, it was much cheaper not to care about the environment to maximize economic return. Today on GAC, we're going to dig into one of the most serious environmental problems, gas flaring during oil extraction, and how the king of cryptos could help us to overcome this scourge. Here we go. What is gas flaring? It is the combustion of natural gas that is released during oil extraction operations. These gases are burned to avoid, as much as possible, the emission of methane into the atmosphere. Methane is a gas which is 21 times more problematic than carbon dioxide for the climate if we analyze its impact on global warming over a 20-year period. Venting this natural gas directly into the atmosphere is a strictly prohibited practice in most countries. Producers must, at a minimum, burn it to transform the gas mixture into carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water. These flaring operations generate 400 million tons of CO2 every year. 400 million tons is more than the annual emissions of countries like France, Great Britain, or Italy. Now, even if this kind of comparison can be sometimes misleading, such comparisons have been equally applied to Bitcoin miners and their emissions. Why don't producers sell this gas instead of burning it? Unfortunately, oil producers face significant challenges in capturing, storing, transporting, and distributing this gas to an eventual market. Most of the time, given the relatively small amount of gas available compared to the cost of infrastructure to sell it, typically it is simply not economically feasible, and it is easier, and more importantly, more economical, to flare this valuable natural resource despite the waste. This is especially true for offshore platforms in the middle of the ocean, as it is difficult to connect this kind of platform to the electricity distribution network. Is flaring an effective way of eliminating methane? In theory, when the infrastructure is well designed and conditions are optimal, it is estimated that over 99% of the gas is properly burned. However, over time, production and throughput decrease, the pressure in the flares drop, and the flame is more affected by environmental conditions such as strong winds. This can significantly alter the efficiency of the combustion, which means that more of the natural gas is released directly into the atmosphere. With current global operating and maintenance practices and regulations, the International Energy Agency estimates that the average overall efficiency of flaring operations worldwide is approximately 90%. 10% of loss may seem low, but as methane is 21 times more emissive than CO2, an inefficiency of 10% is equivalent to multiplying the environmental impact by a factor of 3 and can have enormous impact. Finally, we must consider that this average of 90% covers great variance between sites, with the least efficient sites only able to eliminate 50%. That is why there is often those pillars of flame on all these installations. It's not for show. It should also be noted that flaring operations can have an impact on the local population. The concept of nighttime no longer exists in some places. It's like having a spotlight on your window 24/7. And I'm not even talking about the times the pipes are used to dry fish, with all the risks that entails. In short, for these environmental and social reasons, countries and international organizations, including the World Bank, launched the ZRF initiative in 2015. The objective is to totally eradicate venting and flaring of natural gas by the end of the decade and eventually reach the goal of zero emissions by 2050 and avoid global warming of more than 2 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, these beautiful initiatives have not been followed by any concrete action, or only marginally, as is often the case in ecological matters for more than 30 years. You can read more about it here. If you see the blue bar on the graph, you can see the evolution of gas flaring worldwide for more than 10 years. At best, you can say that the situation is stable with no significant reduction despite any efforts to do so. Some critics say that the recent decline is solely due to the COVID crisis and the downturn in human activity, and the volume is expected to start to rise again in 2022. The chart below shows where we are currently and the goal itself. We're off to a bad start to meet it, and it's clearly not going fast enough given the climate emergency. Moreover, the figures published by all these international organizations such as the World Bank and the IEA are clearly below the actual amount of methane emitted. Numerous studies and articles suggest that the amount of methane emitted into the atmosphere from oil activities is at least twice what is found in these official reports. In short, no progress is being made. We need concrete solutions, and above all, we need to be pragmatic about human nature. It may seem cynical, but the sad reality is that if we only rely on people's ethics and morals, nothing will change. As we said at the beginning of this article, the only way that things will change is if the ecological goals are aligned with the economic interests. This is where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin mining is a real opportunity that can be used on a large scale. Miners connect directly to the existing infrastructure and turn that wasted energy into digital gold. As Sebastian said in this video, mining is one of the few industries, if not the only one, that will always find a market. Compared to something like producing hydrogen with a surplus energy production capacity, we must still find a use or a buyer for this gas. This is not always obvious, and it is by no means guaranteed or predictable. With Bitcoin mining, it's very different. It doesn't matter what you have in terms of total power at your disposal. 10 megawatts, 100 megawatts, or even 1,000 megawatts, which would correspond to a large nuclear reactor. The market can absorb all new entrants of all sizes without any limit. There will never be a time when the mining industry will be saturated and new Bitcoin mining operations are rejected or can't find a market. On the other hand, of course, it is becoming more and more competitive as the miners share a fixed size cake. However, there is no cronyism or corruption. Everyone plays by the same rules, and everyone can expect to get a share of the profits generated by this industry. There is currently 900 Bitcoins distributed every day to miners around the world to reward them for their participation in securing the network. While there is also transaction fees, these are currently a marginal part of their revenue. In the last year, the mining industry generated over $15 billion. Now, how does this connect with flaring? The miners propose to valorize this gas instead of flaring it, or worse, instead of releasing it directly into the atmosphere, as we still see too often on some oil platforms. This gas can be used to produce electricity through local generators and thus power containers filled with ASICs. Since the process of converting natural gas into electricity is much more efficient than simple flaring, the operation is extremely beneficial for the environment. The flaring problems that we talked about before do not occur when used locally for electricity, and it is in the economic interest for the producers as long as the electricity can be used. The company Crusoe, for example, has developed a patented system that would reduce methane emissions into the atmosphere by up to 98% when mining Bitcoin. So, in addition to recovering natural gas, you reduce the environmental impact of the extraction site. I honestly don't see how we could do better in methane elimination. Investors are not fooled and have understood the potential very well. The company Crusoe has just raised $350 million recently to develop its activities in the US and in the world. Moreover, the fact that oil extraction sites are often in very remote places, such as in the middle of the ocean or in the wasteland of Alaska, no longer pose any problem. All you need is an internet connection, for example via satellite, to connect to the Bitcoin network. When you think about it, Bitcoin transforms large amounts of energy that are difficult to transport into lightweight digital information that can communicate quickly. For example, when you are speaking on a VoIP call, your voice is converted via microphone into a digital format, and this information travels on the internet, reaches your phone, and is then converted into a sound wave to finally touch your eardrum. Similarly, Bitcoin is a system for circulating energy in a digital form. The energy is converted into Bitcoin at point A, can circulate at the speed of the wave of the internet, and finally be converted at point B. This reconversion process would mean buying energy in exchange for Bitcoins in a different district. In short, the potential is gigantic. Crusoe is just one company, among others, that is developing rapidly in this sector. Many industrialists realize the potential that this represents not only economically, but also ecologically. For example, the company Easy Blockchain has started to redeploy ready-to-use modules. You just plug them into the power supply at the back of your factory, and you're mining Bitcoin. A few months or years later, if the situation changes, these containers can disappear as quickly as they appeared. BBGS is obviously also positioning itself in this sector. For example, Sebastian Guspiu told us that he was in contact with an oil producer in Africa for an important mining project, which is paying $2.5 million a day in fines because of its gas emissions into the atmosphere. Bitcoin miners, like Sebastian Guspiu, will be a small miracle for him. The biggest companies on the planet, such as Exxon, are getting involved, and it is becoming more obvious for the producers. Critics may claim that it will be more relevant to use this gas or this electricity for other utilities, such as heating or the general energy supply of urban areas, etc. Yes, that is possible and an option, but why hasn't anyone seized the opportunity until now? Why haven't companies jumped into this market? Why isn't the gas valued in other ways? The answer is simple: because it was not economically viable. Another example is that the Bitcoin mining itself has an impact on the environment prior to minting. For example, all the materials needed to produce the ASICs and the electronic waste that it generates. Certainly, but we must be pragmatic and ask ourselves the question, is it that, in the end, when we weigh the pros and cons, is there a net positive effect? Is the reduction or even the total elimination of gas flaring worth it or not? Of course it is. A third counterargument would be that mining is a way to legitimize oil extraction. We consider this to be absurd. Whether we like it or not, the world cannot yet do without fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. All the people who say otherwise will be much less smart when it will be 5 degrees in their living room this winter and when they won't be able to fill up their car. This is an economically viable solution, and we can imagine the Bitcoin network powered 100% by gas flaring. The results are quite interesting. The Cambridge Bitcoin Electricity Index estimates that the Bitcoin network consumes between 55 and 330 terawatt hours. The World Bank estimates that the volume of natural gas related to oil extraction activities is about 130 billion cubic meters per year. As previously stated, many experts believe that the reality is much more worrying, but let's use this figure as a baseline. Using the energy density of these gases, we find that these 130 billion cubic meters correspond to 1,364 terawatt hours. Assuming that the transformation of this energy into electrical energy through a turbine and an alternator is 30%, we arrive at 420 terawatt hours. This means that gas flaring could therefore generate 420 terawatt hours per year. This is enough energy to power the entire Bitcoin network current. And even more than that, as Bitcoin's estimated consumption ranges between 55 and 330 terawatt hours, with Cambridge's estimate at around 143 terawatt hours. We could even consider that 50% of the gas is not exploitable, because it is too dirty, for example, and we would still be in the same orders of magnitude. For example, this calculation is simplistic because it would have been necessary to specify the composition of the natural gas, which can vary by extraction site. For our example, we consider that the gas was 100% methane, which is not always the case. The efficiency of the conversion into electricity, as well as the proportion of gas that can be exploited, should be refined. But the rough calculation allows us to have a reasonable estimate in mind. As critics point out, Bitcoin consumes as much energy as a small country, but at the same time, it would be quite possible for it to be powered almost 100% by currently unused energy, including natural gas from oil extraction activities. Russia and the United States are beginning to understand this perfectly and are repositioning themselves rapidly. The purpose of this video was to bring European and politicians' attention to the subject and realize that Bitcoin is not a threat to the environment. Rather, it is an extremely powerful tool that can help everyone to achieve the goals we have set for ourselves in terms of ecological improvement. To read and hear in 2022 that Bitcoin is an aberration for the environment is simply unrealistic. More new videos coming soon. Until then, ciao.